p.m. on the 7th day of January 2026. It is the first, is it now? The first Wednesday, yes it is, in the month of January in the year of 2026. And it's our first midweek special. And I make bold to say that it is indeed a special time because it's a full house, at least by the measure that we use to determine what full is. Well, -1. Gabriel's already on the sunny side. But yes, Dr. Majeed is in the house with us. Let's start by giving him a rousing Happy New Year.
Oh, my God.
Thank you for being here.
That took by surprise, really.
It did? But why? Oh, wow. Dear. It's always such a joy to have you join us on Wednesdays. Yes. How was last year?
How was last year?
Yeah, how was it?
It was a few days ago.
Oh, God. As someone said, I think about 2025 like it was just yesterday. But altogether, it is last year still. Yeah. So, and we're gearing up for 2026. If you haven't started already, I promise you're late. Make sure that you are all prepped. 7 days into the year, but still a lot going on. A lot still continues to go on, and you want to make sure that you are in the right place as far as all the information that is coming out and also knowing where to position. That's for your personal, growth. First of all, before we now look at Nigeria and everything that has to do with Nigeria. But yes, indeed, things are happening already, and we're ready to get into Dr. Majeed. Good to see you once again.
Thank you very much. And I want to wish our listeners a very happy new year.
Thank you.
And prosperous times ahead.
Amen. Amen. It's hard to... I'm not saying it's hard, because one of our stories here is a bit of a morbid projection about how 141 million Nigerians are going to be in poverty this year, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Well, like the believers will say, may not be our portion.
Amen. Amen. We'll get into the economics of that entire story, but let's start today off with what's happening. CSOs are not even playing this year. They have come out with what is a very, very strong criticism of the president and the National Assembly over what they've termed as secrecy, as well as rubber stamp approvals in the 2024 and 2025 budget reenactment. Now, this story first came up towards the end of last year, but I think that it's important with what's going on, especially as the headlines are saying, in view of where what's going to happen with the 2026 budgets. We already know that there was a repeal and reenactment of the 2024 and 2025 budgets, and the target is that of 2025 should be sort of completely implemented by March of this year, right? But with the CSOs are saying, look, there's a way you even want to go about this thing that you can do it and it will not amount to fiscal rascality. Right now, what they're accusing the president and the National Assembly of is saying that they are colluding to do fiscal rascality as far as the handling of these federal budgets. Now, the organizations in question are the Center for Social Justice, Africa Network for Environmental and Economic Justice. You also have CISLAC there, which is the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. Then there's Budget as well, and Primark. All of them urging that this fiscal rascality should stop. Now, what again is this? It's quite a strong term to use to describe things. They're looking at the backdrop of the president's transmission of fresh appropriation, repeal, and reenactment bills for 2024 and 2025 fiscal years to the National Assembly. This happened on the 19th of December last year. After which the president requested legislative approval to repeal the existing budgets and replace them with revised expenditure frameworks. And according to the presidency, they were asking that this should be done because this is what aligns with prevailing fiscal realities. Now, let's look at, first of all, the 2024 Appropriation Act. It was originally passed at 35.06 trillion naira and then reenacted with an increased total expenditure of 43.56 trillion for the year ending 31st of December 2025. This is a budget that ought to have been, expended, implemented by the end of December 2024. So you have a revised 2024 budget that comprises 1.74 trillion for statutory transfers, 8.27 trillion for debt service, 11.27 trillion for recurrent non-debt expenditure, and 22.28 trillion for capital expenditure and development fund contributions. The one for 2025, by the time it was reenacted, it ended up being a reduced budget, but it still had all these major components as well. Now, what the civil society groups are arguing is that beyond the figures and the speed of the legislative action, which was also a cause of concern, the entire process, they say, is a grave assault on Nigeria's constitutional and fiscal order. Because apart from what has happened with this one, you even have the 2026 one that they say, no, is it the 2026? Yes. First of all, the 2024 and 2025 reenacted ones, as well as that of the 2026, have not even been made available in the public domain for criticism, for appraisal, and all of that. A lot of what these bodies are known to do. And meanwhile, you have a constitution that provides for the submission of expenditure proposals by the president to the National Assembly and requires legislative approval before public expenditure is incurred. So what is happening now is, with the repealed and reenacted ones and any other one that is currently in use, it didn't get legislative approval, but expenditure started. Now they are saying that we don't want this to happen, even in this particular instance as well. They are demanding unconditional commitment from the president to abide strictly by constitutional limits, spending only what has been duly appropriated. Now, I know that this might seem like not much of news, but there are implications to this that I think that are of grave consequence and that we should really, really be looking at. When this first broke about the reenactment, we talked about it just a little bit, but perhaps maybe we didn't get to the core of it. But it would be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on this. Are we having fiscal rascality as alleged by the CSOs in the conduct of this administration's handling of budgets?
I would rather call it a physical crisis, not necessarily rascality. Even though on the surface it looks like rascality, but I know that no government, or no matter how bad the government is, no government would want to run concurrent physical plans simply because you cannot fully implement them year in, year out. And because, one, government falls short regularly on its projected revenue with rising debt, so it makes their physical plan unsustainable. Within the short term, not even the long term. Very within the short term makes it unimplementable, unsustainable. If you also look at their projected crude oil benchmark for the budget proposal, it's also usually not realistic because we do not actually meet up with such levels of production per day. We are still struggling between 1.5 to 1.6 million barrels per day, and sometimes they benchmark our budget at 1.8 or 1 or 2 million barrels per day. If you also look at the budget, the deficit, the projected deficit, sometimes again because of extended borrowing, because of new borrowings, so those have to adjust the deficit. So for me, really, it is more about a physical crisis than a physical rascality, because the government's finances itself is in serious crisis. And what you see them trying to do is budgetary gymnastics of some sort to actually try and manage what has become a very terrible situation. But that does not in any way excuse government from the allegations by the CSOs, allegations of fiscal irresponsibility, the allegations of colluding with the National Assembly to rubber stamp government fiscal plans without proper scrutiny, overlapping budgetary expenditure, so that we do not even know the budget we are implementing at the moment, and such fiscal chaos in the system. For me, again, it's more of a fiscal crisis, it's a financial crisis the federal government is experiencing. I say this because the government is unable to implement its own budget, and for a long time, we've seen contractors complain, for example, of not being paid, and these contractors will tell that this is the first time in many years that this is happening. That throughout the Buhari 8 years, this didn't happen, for instance. But right now it is happening. In fact, even the National Assembly constituency projects are barely implemented. So it tells you that something has really gone wrong.
So I want to come from the point of what they estimate in the budget to contribute to revenue. For example, the how many barrels per day and all of that. This is not the first time that we are seeing that there is this projection and then it doesn't actually amount to that in terms of revenue because we are not meeting up with the required number of barrels per day. You had that in the previous administration. And so when we see it here, perhaps, first off, we think, oh, well, they're just hoping. This is wishful thinking. But wouldn't you expect that with the state of things and how critical things have gotten right now, if this is a crisis of budget implementation, wouldn't you think that they would try something different in terms of what the projected revenues are, for example, and how it would translate at the end of the day? 2026 appropriation bill was presented by the president as well. So even while we're still dealing with 2024 and 2025, there's that of 2026 as well. And again, the concern is that they have not even been made public for the watchdogs to look at it and say, okay, perhaps do this in terms of projections for revenue and all of that. So why do they still keep repeating the same thing when we see that there's even a greater...
It's an annual ritual. You have to present budgetary proposals to the National Assembly for their scrutiny, for their approval through legislative action. But you see, I'm looking at this thing beyond the symptoms we are seeing. The federal government is having a problem of cash crunch. The federal government. Many people do not understand this and they do not seem to appreciate them. So they're wondering, how can they have cash crunch problem? Right? Given the euphoria that followed subsidy removal on petrol, on electricity, and the free floating of the naira. So where has the money gone to? I've always said it that these two policies dried up government's revenues rather than increase them. These two policies. And when I was complaining here, I said, look, this is going to hit government harder than it's going to hit me as an individual in the long run. That is where we are today. Look, the finance minister late last year actually admitted that there was a shortfall in revenue.
Contradicting what the president said, actually, when he said that they met with the targets.
Thank you. But the evidence, what we can feel, what we can see, that the fact that the government is unable to implement fully, not just fully, partially, it's how do you call it, recurrent, not just recurrent, it's capital projects, capital component of the budget. To the point that, for example, the Calabar-Lagos Coastal Road, government is sourcing fresh borrowing to continue its implementation. Look at the state of federal roads in Nigeria. You can see that most roads have been abandoned. Contractors are not on site. And so it tells you that somebody is not paying somebody money. And I keep telling people that, look, if government has the money to pay, they will pay. The only thing is that they could give these contracts to their cronies, right, to their friends, to those that will give them, if you want to even accuse the government of corruption, they will give to those that will make returns in 10% and 20% to them. But one thing is that somebody will get this contract, somebody will get paid. But a situation where nobody seems to be getting these contracts and getting paid should leave all of us worried. Until this government admits it, it does not have the monies to fund the correct federal government. You talk about thinking of new ways. Yes, that's the only way out. Let me tell you what has happened to Nigeria as at 2023, or between 2023 and 2026. Nigeria has gotten to its wit's end after 24 years of unbridled neoliberal kind of entrepreneurial capitalism. Gotten to our wit's end. And Tinubu hastened it when he did the two things that neoliberal economists have been asking us to do all these years that most other head of states or presidents kind of didn't just do, which is to remove subsidy on petrol and to float the naira. So we're able to manage our situation a little bit better. Not that it was so good, but at least it was better than this, because these two policies were in place. And then once they removed the thinking that it was going to usher in utopia, economic utopia or financial utopia, it dried up your revenues. And people will wonder how. My dear Somi, it's when the government was removing subsidy and floating the naira, there was something that escaped their notice. And that's why people that faulted the president for doing that on the first day of inauguration, or the day of inauguration, actually have been proved right. Even though I felt at no time should it be done. But at least you should have actually waited a little. Looked at the books. You see, the federal government is the largest employer of labor in Nigeria. The federal government runs the largest bureaucracy in Nigeria. The federal government is responsible for so many things in this country. Security services, for instance. All the personnel of defense security services, Air Force, Navy, Army, internal security, police, civil defense, road safety, immigration, customs, name them, ministries, parastatals, departments, agencies. And we have agencies like National Center for Art and Culture. You have the one for nomadic education. You have the one for Arabic and Islamic studies. You have all sorts of agencies under the federal government. Now, they have very serious ones like the railway system, electricity, it's still under the federal government, transmission, for instance, prison services. I mean, there are just too many things on the shoulders of the federal government. So what has happened is this: when they remove subsidy and floated the naira, and inflation setting as like never seen before, you know what happened? The government suddenly realized that what would ordinarily have cost the government 100 naira to implement before that policy was implemented will now require probably 1,000 naira. The government ought to have to increase minimum wage to cushion the effect of its policies from 30,000 naira to 70k in naira terms, which was more than double the previous minimum wage, even though in dollar terms, relatively it was only a reduction. But the truth is we don't earn enough dollars, so we earn more from non-oil revenues through taxes, which is in naira. So government expenditure ballooned exponentially against a revenue that was either fixed or dwindling from external receipts. So these two policies injure government finances. So the money government is harvesting is naira illusion. It's not enough to fund government activities. It's money illusion. That's in, the money is much in naira in quantity, but in quality it has reduced drastically. In fact, there was this situation where even security services had to go back to rework their budgets because as the data that naira was jumping against dollar on per second basis, government had to intervene.
Yeah.
The budget for some external expenses for military officers are going to go on tour of duty as per a prerequisite to go to their next ranks. Once naira fell below the threshold upon which they budgeted for that year, they ran into a crisis. Because if, for example, you went to the National Assembly in September with the budget that says, okay, 700 naira to the dollar, and that same year, naira got 1,500 naira, what kind of budget are you running? It affected federal government across the board. Unfortunately for the federal government, by now the states are supposed to be sharing in some of these responsibilities, but they are not. So, for instance, prison services have been transferred to the concurrent list. So state governments are supposed to be running prisons by now. I don't know of any state government that has laid a block for a prison service of its own. I don't think there's any. So the federal government is running prison services. It still carries that responsibility. Electricity, for instance, has been moved to the concurrent list through the Electricity Act of 2023. That the states are now empowered to generate, distribute, and even transmit electricity within their own ring-fenced areas, right? I don't know of any state that has actually gone into that business fully, beyond making enabling laws and setting up regulatory frameworks or agencies. So federal government is still running the transmission company of Nigeria, for instance, and partially running the DISCOs and the GENCOs as partners.
So let's say that.
So what I'm saying is,
the
federal government is carrying so much load that its current finances, arising from inflation, can no longer enable it to implement its budget fully. If you ask a typical federal worker today, they will tell you that even the minimum wage, for instance, if you do the calculation properly, federal workers cannot be said to be receiving minimum wage. It was just an addition to their salary that they called minimum wage implementation. Is that difficult for the federal government? This is the first time in the long term that salaries of federal workers in some categories extend well into the next month before they are paid. Well, they are listening to me and they're not.
I can attest to.
Thank you very much. In fact, the FCT administration is a mess in this regard. Paper, biro to work, they will tell there's no money to procure for those things. It's that serious. So What I'm saying is, government has not admitted it yet. These policies have injured this government. I would say that it was never the right way to go. Now, the question will now be, what was to be done? It is something I've been talking about since Adam was created. What is the source of revenue for government?
Sir, okay, let's say that
we need to address this issue. This budget about revenue?
Where
does government actually get? For example, where do they get money from? One major source: crude oil export in its crudest form, through JVs with oil companies. Meaning, when you hear that Nigeria is producing 1.5 million barrels per day. All of that, don't pick up your paper and your pen and start calculating as if $70 times $1.5 million what government is earning. No. Government is earning far less than that because it's a JV. The oil companies will take their own share, government will take their own share. And where government does not make investment in the operations, their share will be reduced further. And in some cases, we do not actually meet up with our cash call.
Which brings me back to the term fiscal rascality and make me want to probe it even more. So if, for example, what you said is what obtains based on the JVs and government not earning on entirely 1.5 million barrels per day, why do they keep projecting at 1.5 million barrels, for example? Is that a fiscal irresponsibility?
That's why I said physical. Look, I don't want to sensationalize this issue because it's a very serious matter. I said we've got it to our wit's end. It's like, I keep giving this analogy. We are driving a car. You didn't service the car. And you took off from let's say, Abuja to Lokoja every day for 30 days. Meaning by this time, ordinarily, we should expect that the car should be due for servicing, right? And then you run it on to the point where it is indeed due for servicing. The oil is now very light and it's now drying up. Then I took the car from you. Instead of servicing this car and changing whatever I need to change, I am back on the journey to Kaduna and I get to Jere Junction and the car breaks down. Now, the fault is not entirely mine though, but I saw you driving this car without servicing. So I felt, okay, maybe the car is supernatural. It doesn't need servicing. And so I got to Jere and the car broke down. What has happened is that since 1999 at least, we've been practicing a particular kind of economic model that has gotten to its wit's end. It is at its expiry date. And Tinubu came in and hastened the expiry date by implementing the most neoliberal of these policies that other governments have dodged over the time, which is subsidy and protection of the naira. It is haunting us. The promise then was that it will free up money. It cannot free up money because it's like when you suffocate me, for instance, if you attempt to suffocate me, and deny me of oxygen. By the time I survive it, maybe partially, I would have suffered organ damages that will require much more money to resolve, if I thought it is even resolvable, than the free air I was breathing. We warned several, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, that these policies are injurious to the economy. It will create crisis. It will not create revenue. One of the first interviews I held that I participated in after this policy was moved was that I told everybody that came to this, the government will not save money from subsidy removal. Because the money you are aiming to save, you want to spend it on the effect of this subsidy removal, which is increasing wage for workers and increasing cost of running government, cost of doing contracts.
Granted, sir. Now let's look at the people who are supposed to serve as checks and balances to some of these decisions that are coming from the executive.
See, I'm trying to take this matter from the foundation. I'll talk about checks and balances when this money itself is even available. We can also get checks and balances. I'm saying what we should be discussing now is we have gotten to the end of our economic rascality generally, not just physical, not just budget and physical matters. I asked a question, you don't be able to answer me. What is the source of revenue for the federal government of Nigeria? The main source of revenue. What is the main source of foreign exchange? Crude oil export and export of gas.
Okay, sir. So when I say checks and balances, here's where I'm going with it.
Yes.
You have a National Assembly that goes through these routine presentations of budgets and then claps at the end of the day and goes ahead to assent for it to be implemented. Isn't that the point where you were supposed to start interrogating? So, for example, how are you looking at 1.5 million barrels? Then from there, we'll now get to, okay, the crude oil that you're talking about, is it even going out? Are we making revenue from there?
The National Assembly. If, for instance, presenting the budget 1 trillion to renovate the state house and budget 30 billion naira for education, for instance. We can force the assembly to say, why are you not? Don't you know we should prioritize education over renovation of state house?
Yeah, but as it stands, so let's leave 2024 and 2025. The 2026 one that was presented has not been made available to public for us to even scrutinize and then face the national. So it's all being done under this shroud of secrecy.
See, there's a problem here. The question here is not whether the line items. Before now, budget will tell you there are repetitions in the line items.
Yeah.
That is, government budgeted for things they budgeted for last year, they budgeted for this year. And government will implement those things. So you can say, this must be fraudulent because you cannot buy spoon last year and buy spoon this year. But at least government was being able to afford to fund those budget items. You cannot charge fraud. You cannot say, look, assembly didn't do your work well or your collusion. We can be discussing that. This government goes to the assembly with all its fiscal plans. Assembly understands it and it's not implemented, including the ones that
their own constitutional project.
We are in a bigger mess than just what we're talking about. That's what I'm saying. I've asked a question. You know, on this program, for many years now, we will come here and say something that it will take years later before those are supposed to understand will begin to understand what we're talking about. So I'm no longer surprised. I'm no longer. So I've just resigned to faith. It's okay. Just say it as it is and leave it at that. What's the source of revenue? So since you've been an adult, you've been hearing that Nigeria's population is growing steadily. Now we're over 200 million according to statistics, right? Nigeria has not been able to produce beyond 2 million barrels per day of crude oil. Does that not worry you?
So let's interrogate it.
Thank you. The question is, what model of economy are we actually practicing in Nigeria that has made external receipts very thin and restricted to crude oil exploration through JVs? What is the model of our economy? What kind of economy are we practicing? I've always warned that, you see, taxes, see this what you call internally generated revenue is a function of externally generated revenue. How do I mean? But the government is buoyant enough to receive a lot of foreign inflows into its coffers. And then government spends money. For example, if this budget is implemented fully, contractors are paid, government would have received more money from internally generated revenue through tax, VAT and all that because of it's public spending that translates into private earnings and private spending too, right? In fact, in the United States, for instance, sometimes when they have economic crisis, what they do is that they pump money into the pockets of people directly. So you can go and spend this money, go and shop, go and spend. When you spend, it cannot reflect the economy. So, and I'm saying, why are we not able to do the same thing here? Why don't we have the means to properly spend enough that will reflect the economy? So as you are spending, you don't have worries about what you're going to eat tomorrow because you know you're going to earn tomorrow. I said the reason is because Nigerian government does not have a diversified source of foreign exchange. You might be hearing from government supporters that Nigeria recorded trade surplus in recent times to the US. That trade surplus goes to private pockets that are mostly entities that are owned by foreign countries that are backed by the states, by the government of those foreign entities. So we're operating out of Nigeria, taking advantage of our internal capabilities, fiscal competitiveness. That money does not get into the federation account. Now the question is, what is Nigeria supposed to do to get money into its federation account? What is government do to earn money into its own account? Not into Somi's account as an exporter or my account as an exporter. No, that's my money now. You can't. There's a limit to which you can tax it. Yes. And if I'm doing this in Nigeria, it becomes too difficult and I wind up, that means you have lost that little tax I'm going to give you. How do you earn the real revenue externally enough for government to spend into the system? It brings back to what I've been talking, what I've been shouting. Government must reform itself, reposition itself, make itself able to operate export competitive, state-owned public enterprises that can bring in forex into the coffers of the state directly. And this is for federal government and state government, and even local government. Directly. That is, you must do things that can bring money into your coffers directly, the same way you participate in oil exploration, for instance. So the government must begin to, in summary, do business. I've told you somebody, if you're a father and you don't do anything for the living, and you're only collecting rent from your ancestral family compound, you'll be poor. Your children will be hungry. You'll be tattered. Especially we are very irresponsible, and you even consume more of the money on your own self than your children. It is a dangerous thing. Go to village and see it happens like that. But when you leave that your vicinity, you establish businesses that can attract spending from the neighboring environment. Even if it's a car you're selling in front of that house, and neighbors are talking about a car from you, it will increase family revenue. You can now train children to school more comfortably. It will now ease tension on family resources and family old family rooms that people will be struggling for to collect rent from strangers. Nigeria today is relied on one major product. It's called a monopoly economy. Crude oil for its external receipt. That has to be diversified. And I'll give you examples of other countries. I know somebody will call in today to say, but government has done it before, they didn't do well. I said, that you wrote an exam and failed doesn't mean you should withdraw from school. Go back and study your books. Correct the mistakes that made you to fail. Stop going to nightclubs, you're supposed to be reading your books, and pass the exam. In essence, government must become reformed and be above board like Caesar's wife. You see, government is like the God on earth. They have power of life and death. They do. Government can decide how to procreate. They can decide how to marry to start with. How to even live with your spouse. They can decide it. They can decide how many children you must have. And if you commit a crime, they can sentence you to death. So they are like God on earth. That's why government must be near perfect, like God Almighty. They must be omnipotent, omnipresent. Our government can know, for example, what you are doing in this studio at any point in time. It's their responsibility. They know what we are doing. They will know what discussing. They are monitoring us right now. The same way God is seeing everybody from everywhere is sitting down. That is the role of government on earth. And I'm saying for so long, government has abdicated this responsibility, seeking to transfer this responsibility to private sector. That's why the private sector is failing. Private sector is failing. The two now, they are failing now. That is the reason why. Now, look at other countries that are not in our category. Other countries that don't discuss budget. Have you ever had China discussing budget? Or Saudi Arabia? Or European Union? What is budget? They don't. Now, we modeled our economy after America. It was erroneous. It was an error. You know why? The dollar is the global currency of trade. It's the global currency of economic transaction. It's the global currency of economic production. Meaning, dollar is like the global currency, in summary. America owns it. So America might not have overseas investment much. But America owns the dollar. They can print it at any time. They need money. So if there's a problem in America right now, Trump will just issue a statement. I want to give every household $2,000. And within 48 hours, everybody will get credited. You know why? It's simple. The Treasury will simply issue bonds or securities, Treasury bills, just name them. And the Reserve will simply buy them off. And then print the dollar, give the Treasury to distribute to government agencies to finance their emergencies because they own the dollar. And the country has debt. So we hear that America is owing debt. It's the largest debt in the world. America is owing itself. It's like what you call ways and means in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. But for you, a non-American entity, you must earn this dollar. You can't print it. You have to earn it. Remember I said it is the global trade. It's the global currency of trade. Everything in the world is dominated against the dollar. We are discussing budget now. We have shifted to dollar because crude oil comes in dollar. How do we earn this dollar? The only way a government can earn dollar is through export competitive investment. That was what the Chinese learned. The Koreans, the Singaporeans, the Japanese, name any emerging economy you've seen that have become first world economy, learned this lesson the hard way and realized that no, as a government, you must have goods and services you are exporting to the world as a government to bring in revenue. You can do it alone, you can do it in partnership, it doesn't matter. But what matters is you must, for example, our LNG project, or LNG company rather, is the partnership between the Nigerian state and multinationals. So meaning for every cubic feet of gas you export from that place, the Nigerian state has its own dividend coming in. Every year, LNG brings dividend for the federal government. Imagine if somebody had invested in LNG those days. That means we would have remained dependent solely on crude oil. Or solely. What am I saying? It is time to change the status quo. We can't continue on this neoliberal path. It takes us nowhere. Britain embarked on this part and suffered dearly for it, despite the fact that they also own the British pound sterling. So they can also print and do what they want to do with it, but they are more conservative. Though the Labour government of UK today is trying to relaunch state-owned enterprises, particularly in energy production. Because one area that the British government made its worst mistake was to abdicate responsibility in energy production and let the private sector. And guess what? Government-owned companies from Sweden, from France, invaded the UK and started making money off the UK citizens at commercial rates. Because the EDF of France is a state-owned company, belongs to the French government. They are operating in UK at a commercial rate. So you are reaching the French government, and the French government uses that money to subsidize electricity at home to make life easy. So the British government is not trying now to set up the greater British power to rival EDF on home soil. Now, the largest windmill for renewable energy production in UK is owned by the Swedish government. Look, one of my colleagues, our colleagues, I'm sure, you know Nancy Lo?
Yes.
Nancy Naji.
Money
she went to Switzerland and came back sometime last year. And we was lamenting that whoever told the Nigerian government that government does not do business, she was wondering. Because we went to Switzerland and everything was run by the government, including telecommunications. Including telecoms. We must move away from this part. Tax cannot save us, levies cannot save us. We must do the work. And like I said, to do this, why did we fail in the past? Government was corrupt. That's why I've always talked about committing class suicide. You see, where we are now, we can't afford any more corruption. We must understand that we are at a point where you cannot afford it anymore.
What are the chances that we're going to see this at least steps in this direction from this current administration?
If a government cannot implement a budget of its own, let me tell you what about budget implementation. Like I said, you can accuse government of procurement fraud. 60% of corruption in Nigeria is through procurement. Why was that? Government had the money to implement budget. But the only thing they can bring up very nasty projects in the budget, do show the implementations, show the evaluation, and just claim money straight. But this money that are siphoned into public pockets. We are paid by the government. Government had these monies to pay. Today is not the case. We're no longer hearing of somebody who was paid 10 billion naira for 1 billion naira job. That's not the case now. The case is, even those who did the job are not being paid.
All right, sir. So,
and I'm aware that most contractors in Nigeria are employees of government. So I don't think any government want to hurt itself. They are in a fix. They are in a jam. And I was not surprised. I'm not surprised. It is many people may not realize. It's when this year starts that people will realize.
That's why we're having the conversation right now, because
that's why we need to have the conversation. That we need a new, we're a democracy. Let me give you a historical analysis of what I'm talking about. So in 1929, there was the Great Depression. Because the world at that time was excessively towards the right. It was a more capitalist-driven world. Newly industrialized countries, capitalism was the mainstay and all of that. So there was this idea that markets will fix themselves. That markets have internal mechanisms to correct themselves. So government should not intervene when there is an economic crisis, that the markets will correct itself. America believed this, Europe believed it. It was orthodoxy then. The president of America then was Herbert Hoover, who was Republican. So he believed so much in this principle, this orthodoxy. When things were getting out of hand, inflation was rising, the market system has misbehaved so much that it has gotten complicated and the economy was on the downward slide. Herbert Hoover, believing that government should not intervene at all, stayed away from intervening. But there was an economist, a British economist, who thought otherwise. You know, economics is not a natural science, it's a social science, meaning opinions can change, findings can vary. People can come up with ideas that are out of the box, are not even in textbooks. And they test it and it works. So John Maynard Keynes was a British economist who had a different thinking at the time. Who said government must intervene to stem the tide of economic crisis that is raging globally. That was his thinking. And he reduced it to thesis. And he was concerned enough to now write letters to the rulers of the world, including the American president. And that was when a man sitting on the wheelchair, President Franklin Roosevelt, who was then governor of New York, he suffered polio, so he was on a wheelchair as governor. He read the thesis of John Maynard Keynes and now used that. He believed that this is the way out. He now used that to formulate his policy proposition to contest for the next American presidency, which was in 1929, or rather 1928. Now, no, sorry, 1929 because he was sworn in 1930. Now, he ran for that election using the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, called it Keynesian theory of economics now. And a development was called the New Deal, which is a document, like a policy document. And he ran with it. He criticized the orthodoxy and said, look, as a government, he's going to intervene directly to create jobs, to put money in the pockets of the people, to deflate the economy. And he's going to introduce stronger regulations to correct markets. The market can correct itself. He ran with this. And because the American population has suffered from the old orthodoxy, as we are suffering now, people give him an opportunity to come on board and implement this idea. It was Roosevelt actually that institutionalized, for instance, social security safety net in America. It was there partially, but he institutionalized it through an act of the Congress. He introduced several other programs, several other federal programs that institutionalized direct government intervention in the lives of the American people. He introduced work-based program. For instance, he said, look, create physical infrastructure, fund them for people to go and work and earn money. And then the group will spread this money freely. In 100 days, he has so much to show as an achievement for this new direction that he had to address the nation through the Congress. That's why in this 100 days in office, that will not copy, we don't know the reason. The man he had so much to achieve. He had so much achievement in 100 days. He had to address the country. And to show that the Americans had confidence in his ideas and in his rule, the man won elections for a record 4 times. That in the first of his 4th term. He was president for 12 years. From wheelchair. Now, he was accused of taking America to communism, to socialism, because some Americans believe that government should not even give anybody 1 naira for not doing anything. It's a belief, and people believe that. But he said, no, not everybody can really work. And to make society balanced, you must give help to. So what I'm saying in the sense is, he brought a completely new idea that changed America forever. So that when Republicans eventually came out to power, they couldn't abandon all of his programs. No, they retained it. Social security is one of his legacies. They retained it. Till tomorrow, America's largest component of his budget is social security at 18%. No matter you're Republican or Democrat, you must spend money. If you know how much Americans dish out to their citizens, direct help to stay afloat and to stay alive, you wonder. That's their own problem. Like I said, they have the dollar, so they can print it and fund all of these projects.
Well, some would say you have this social, what they call it now, intervention programs here as well under this administration, as pioneered by Muhammadu Buhari.
You don't have the money. It does not, look, we're not there yet. Only a rich man can afford to do charity. We are poor.